While some teenagers spend their gap year traveling across Europe, Yujiro Hanma preferred to join the Vietnam War as a free agent, in order to sharpen his fighting skills. After touring the battlefields of Asia, he would disappear for a while, only to return under a completely different appearance than that of the wild mercenary he showcased during his battle against the American army. With his hair dyed black and slicked back, his aura appears much more sinister, a detail that the anime adaptation fails to convey, seeing as how they still depicted him as a redhead. It's striking to see how much of a resemblance he has with Baki when his face isn't tanned by the sun and covered by his mane, both men possessing almost feminine facial features that denote brutally with the hyper-masculine depictions of their muscle-bound bodies. This is the last time we would see Yujiro rocking such a delicate and floral complexion, his skin returning to a leathery tint that would often be deformed by the absurd body transformations and menacing grimaces that have become the trademark of the ogre. Calling back to my previous video on the topic, it's interesting to note that those very features that have earned him this nickname are directly correlated with acting as said creature. His skin turning pale again and his body losing mass after a long time away from the battlefield, as if these traits were powered by the massacres he perpetrates. He also appears much more relaxed and composed upon his return, when he is seen crushing a wedding where he wasn't invited. His face, instead of conveying aggression or arrogance, is more of a mix of calmness and annoyance, scanning the crowd with the type of laid-back energy that is so characteristic of the awakened state that the Hanmas seem to reach once they graduate from their formative period. The same transformation can be seen in Baki, who also appeared completely changed upon returning from his trip abroad, a story that I have yet to tell, but which mirrors Yujiro's development to a certain extent. The key difference being in the type of activities these two engaged in during their travels. While Baki was touring MMA gyms to get better, it is almost certain that his father must have engaged in much more reprehensible acts. The difference can also be seen in his physique, as his body now looks much more streamlined than when he was ravaging US troops with his bare hands. A trope that his son would also replicate when he would go from 180 pounds to 160 pounds, before entering the underground matches. It's as if they realized that the extra fluff might actually result in decreased performance, and decided to slim down in order to build back up on a more solid base, leading to lighter bodies and leaner physiques. Because this is Grappler Baki we're talking about, the downsizing doesn't lead to any decrease in strength, Yujiro being just as, if not more dangerous in this form than he was in his bulked up teenager state. He would demonstrate that by crushing a jiu-jitsu master in an impromptu Vale Tudo match, his opponent making the mistake of taking him for a simple hooligan, instead of the merciless killer that he is. It's true that his attire could easily mislead some to believe that he's just some kid who got lost on his way to prom. But the perfectly chiseled physique that the removal of the jacket reveals should be a dead giveaway that the boy spells trouble. This victory strikes another parallel with Yujiro's second son, Jack, who would also face a jiu-jitsu artist during his first match of the Maximum tournament, electing to uppercut his opponent into the rafters instead of stomping him into the mat like his father would. This tendency of the ogre to bury his foes is an expression of his superiority, as forcing those who dare challenge him to grovel at his feet establishes him as the dominant fighter, on both a symbolical and physical level. It is this endless pursuit of conquest that would eventually lead to him receiving the title of strongest creature on Earth, and is the driving force behind his combat abilities and charisma. You could therefore think that his presence and behavior at this random wedding was simply motivated by the knowledge that an exhibition match between world champions was to take place, which could explain why he decided to provoke the future husband by ogling his girl, as it secured him a match against the victor, who would coincidentally be the strongest of the two. However, this is one of the rare occasions where the destruction of a martial artist wasn't the reason for Yujiro's presence, as what he sought on that night was a much rarer but also much more desirable prey. This showdown in the ring wasn't the end goal. It was just the consequence of his endless attempts to establish eye contact with this woman, whose boyfriend retaliated by spraying mustard on his clothes in an attempt to humiliate him in front of the crowd, ridiculing his low-budget attire and social status. Yujiro decided to ignore this provocation and straight up kissed the bride, proving that his mind wasn't fixated on combat, a peculiarity that must be underlined, seeing at how uncommon lack of bloodlust is for him. The dejected husband, who didn't know what he was dealing with, decided to grab a knife in order to get back at this insolent brat, leading to another humiliation and prompting the fighter he hired to intervene in order to salvage his honor. When the guy that just kissed your wife makes a fool out of you twice, having another man fight your battles becomes just another blow to your already downtrodden ego. But when this same guy proceeds to crush your bodyguard while at the same time swooning your girlfriend with his seductive gaze, you know that your manhood has effectively left the stage. After the match, Yujiro would flee the scene, having already dispatched every bodyguard beforehand. At this point, it had become clear that he invaded the wedding to steal the bride, having made a show of mugging and cocking the groom in front of everyone he knew. That poor guy's comeuppance wouldn't only come in the form of public humiliation, however, as the man who figuratively stole his girlfriend would later come over to finish the job. And if Yujiro had no interest in taking the guy down at first, his disregard for weaklings doesn't prevent him from engaging in some old-fashioned whim bullying when the occasion arises. In this case, literally picking the guy up by the scruff of his neck, like you would with a disobedient pet. Choke holding someone in that fashion is the most alpha move possible, the strength required to perform such a feat only being equaled by the shame that the recipient of it must feel. At this point, death would come as a welcome liberation, a fate that Yujiro will swiftly deliver to his victim, by literally uncapping his head with a simple push of the thumb. As Kenshiro would say, you don't know it, but you're already dead. The light in the eyes of the now deceased would still reflect surprise seconds afterwards, his demise being showcased to his future spouse in full, blood bubbles and all. This girl, for those unaware, is Baki's mom, a woman named Emi that Yujiro specially selected because, unlike a normal person, she would actually enjoy seeing her future husband choke on his own fluids. A sadistic penchant that Yujiro had immediately picked up on, seeing as how he possesses a similar deviance. This particular disposition, which should be a total deal breaker for a normal person, is actually a very charming and attractive trait in the eyes of the ogre, whose only purpose in life is to find and defeat capable opponents. This doesn't mean that he wishes to face Emi in a hand-to-hand combat, but rather that he wants her to bear him strong children. And who better to create warriors than a woman who gets off on the sight of blood and destruction? Interestingly, he doesn't seem to care about physical genetic traits, having full confidence in the Hanma DNA. After completing his hunt for a mate, Yujiro would then disappear into the night, leaving his now completely subjugated conquest to cover up for his murder. No wonder Baki's childhood was so fucked up. The circumstances leading to the meeting of his parents were just as sordid. The father-son relationship between these two would go on to play a major role in the later apparitions of the ogre, as the entire story of Grappler Baki centers almost exclusively around it. But that's a story for another episode of Manga.